I'm going to give you a quick tour of the open access portion of the Climate Web. We call it the Climate Risk Short Course. There's a lot of material in here. You can spend quite a bit of time exploring it, but it's also very simple to explore. Now, I'm exploring it on my desktop as opposed to the online version of the software. I'll explain to you why I'm doing that, but it's a very similar experience. So we're here, Climate Risk Short Course. You can come over and walk through the text on the right-hand side, which is mostly just the same links that you actually see in the Plex at left. It's very simple to navigate. You need to know almost nothing about the Brain software, but if you want to spend a minute or two understanding the basics, go to all the navigation you need to know, and you can scroll down and read through that text. A couple of additional thoughts here that you can click on: an introductory slide deck. And the reason I'm showing it to you on the desktop is that when I hover over these thoughts, they do open up on the right-hand side. When you go into these thoughts online, you'll have to actually click on the thought for it to open up on the right-hand side. That's the difference. And that's why I'm saving some clicks, saving some steps by demonstrating this on my desktop. When you're done with all the navigation you need to know, go back up, click on the Climate Risk Short Course, go down to the fingerprint of climate change and click on that. And you can read sort of the general introduction to the topic of the climate change fingerprint. And then you can take a look at individual variables here. For example, accelerated permafrost melt. As you'll see on the right-hand side, you can go in and explore text, explore some basic graphics. It's not a massive amount of information. We're not trying to overwhelm anything. And you can also learn things through these little icons that pop up. So for example, accelerated permafrost melt is a potentially very bad outcome. If it goes the wrong way, risk adversity is critical. Accelerating glacier ice loss, Antarctic ice loss, again, potentially a very bad outcome. But you can come up to speed on all of these different variables by clicking on the individual thoughts and then reading through the text and the graphics that we have in the notes field. And there are quite a few elements of the climate change fingerprint, as you can see here. The next is making sense of it all, which takes a systems-based look at climate change. And so again, sort of introducing the topic of a systems-based view, and then you'll see links that correspond to the links in the Plex at left. But here you can go and take a look and explore the topic of thinking about climate change as a wicked problem. Some people don't agree with that, but I think it's a useful formulation, and you can walk through it in the notes field. Or what do we know and not know about climate science and other things? And we use a lot of quotes and slides. You can see on the right-hand side, Donald Rumsfeld's quote: "There are known knowns, there are known unknowns, but there are also unknown unknowns." It is the latter category that tends to be the most difficult. You can take a look at what's coming with climate change. I'm going to click on that for a second because you can come in here and better understand the challenge of forecasting climate change in terms of the physical modeling challenge. You can also then click on some of the implications of a 1 degree centigrade rise. And if you click on that, you'll see that it is linked to a whole bunch of specific examples of what we might expect to see with 1 or 1.5 degrees centigrade. These happen to be taken from one particular book, Linus's 6 Degrees book, which is a very interesting compilation of lots of different estimates. So you can do the same for 2 degrees. You can do the same for 3 degrees, which is probably the most likely outcome by 2100. 4 degrees, certainly plausible. 5 degrees, certainly possible. And then get into some of the more detailed questions. Is there a safe level? George Bacchus on why 3.5 may be the best we can do. How to think about the future of sea level rise. What happens after 2100, because nothing ends in 2100, even though there tends to be an awful lot of discussion around the year 2100. So a lot of information that you can use to get an interesting picture of what is coming. Similarly, for the economics of climate change, a bunch of topics that you can dig into here. Each of these points you to an analysis of a particular topic that is quite important from the standpoint of the economics of climate change. Here you can dig into the economic modeling challenge associated with forecasting or thinking about climate change. So this is still all part of the making sense of it all. Similarly, what are the risks posed by climate change opens up categories of information that you can very easily take a look at. 30 years of business and climate change. What is the history of the business and climate change conversation? And if you click on that, you'll see the same kind of thing in terms of a whole bunch of subsidiary topics that you can dig into. What does success look like, which gets into what would a low carbon transition actually look like? What are the many ways that we might prevent climate breakdown, which gets into the very large topic of climate change solutions. And you can just see lots of the solutions here with links to project drawdown pages, for example. So a large source of information on the solution side. What are the barriers to progress? A critical topic in thinking about climate change, including psychological barriers and cognitive biases. There's lots of good news and bad news, and we've organized that. So for example, you can come into the good news and take a look at interesting stories that in the case of the desktop, they'll pop up here on the right-hand side of my screen. In most cases, sometimes they take a few seconds. On your computer, you'll have to actually click on the thought and then open the URL in a separate browser tab, but it's a couple of clicks, takes a couple of seconds, not a big deal. So there's lots of good news and bad news, and we point you to both categories to help get a better sense of the bigger picture. What if we really wanted to succeed? What would we do? And this introduces the idea of climate chess. And why not simply adapt, which a lot of people are suggesting. So this really does provide a systems-based view of the topic of climate risk, which I think is very useful for people to have. Trillion-dollar questions are something that we have come up with in terms of if you could answer some really big questions, what would those questions be? And none of these have answers per se in terms of anything definitive, but they can help you walk through how risky is the experiment that we're carrying out with climate change. How much is the business risk? Can we overcome our evolution in terms of how we think about risk? Can climate change transcend the culture war, nature-based solutions, and what's likely to happen there? So again, through each of these, you can click on the thought and explore information associated with that trillion-dollar question. Then we have sort of a fun category that I'm not going to get into in a lot of detail. We call it the climate change grab bag, but some climate chronologies, great climate reading. If I click on that, it will open up sort of a whole bunch of recommended books around the topic of climate change. If you go to the great non-climate readings, these aren't sort of things we've selected at random. These are books that aren't about climate change, but really help you understand the problem of climate change. And so some of our recommendations there. But lots of other things here: climate blogs, climate cartoons, climate gifts, climate infographics, climate news sources, must-see videos, climate music videos, climate courses that are out there, popular climate messaging, which is a fun category in terms of just some of the different kinds of images that people have come up with over time to help explore climate messaging. Just an example of the kinds of things we organize into the climate web. And that we have tons of this kind of stuff in the climate web. Facebook pages, Quora and climate change. If you're not familiar with Quora, I would recommend you get a little bit familiar with it. Wikipedia and climate change, some of the climate databases that are out there. So this is what we call a grab bag, a lot of stuff that you can explore, and it's a lot of fun. Coming back, just to wrap up, we organize a series of our Climate Web enabled ebooks here that you can dig into: climate change psychology, visualizing climate change via videos, climate dates, climate chess. A lot of great stuff that you might be interested in digging into. And last, we simply point you to the fact that we have created a series of courses using Climate Web materials. They're organized at our Climate Risk School, and we provide a link to that if you might be interested. So that is a very quick video tour of the open access version of the Climate Web. Very simple to navigate. You're not going to get lost, and lots of content that you can use to come up to speed on lots of interesting questions. And then if you want, you can dig into the rest of the Climate Web, much larger, and with a slightly longer learning curve.